here to talk about such an important topic. We have been in an unprecedented situation with COVID, and now we are in a new situation with all of the unrest that's been taking place. So this is such an appropriately timed topic because as clinicians, we are stretched thin and we really are in need of a refresher on finding ways of staying resilient in the face of both racism and xenophobia. I want to start with first just reminding everyone that there are resources in our chat box. So if you are in need of resources or are interested in ways of kind of connecting with your colleagues or just things that you can provide to your clients to kind of help support you and them during this time, definitely check out what we have in our chat. I highly recommend making use of the 30-day complimentary virtual yoga through the pad. It's such a generous offer, and or use the space at the end for the mindfulness meditation activity, because again, these are charged topics and we need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves so that we can be our best selves, not only for our clients, but also for our families and just for ourselves, because if you don't take care of you, then you can't be there for someone else, right? So I want to move on into introducing our speakers today. I believe that today's conversation is going to be absolutely wonderful, and we have some great speakers joining us. First, I will introduce Dr. LaWanda Hill. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She's a consultant. She is a curator of spaces and identities. She has been no stranger to having discussions on difficult topics and has been a very thought-provoking, has been a leader and a thought-provoker in relation to having these conversations across multiple venues. Her experience includes women's sexual health and wellness as for women of color, and has been doing work in a multicultural kind of counseling setting. She's also has dedicated her voice to being a social justice advocate. So we want to welcome her and thank her for joining us. We'll also be joined by Dr. Helen Hsu, who is a staff psychologist at Stanford as well as Dr. Hill. And she has been a liaison to the Asian American Activity Center. She has been a wonderful resource for information on lots of topics related to just, supporting the Asian community as well as mental health services. She has a very long record of working with wonderful community mental health organizations. And she's the current chair of the Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program for the Training Advisory Committee. So without further ado, I'd love to have them both join us and we can begin our discussion. So thank you, Dr. Hill, and thank you, Dr. Hsu, for joining us.
Great to see you.
I would love to just kind of start really briefly with just checking in with the two of you. How are you feeling during this time? And just kind of where your mindset is. It's also end of day too, so we've had a long day working. Just how are you guys doing today, and how are you feeling about our current situation?
I feel like I get that question so much and it feels so loaded every time, and I think it changes every time, and I think that that's where it is. I'm on a roller coaster. Some days, some moments, like I'm not even going to categorize days. Some moments very hopeful, some moments very much so in despair, some moments very angry, some moments very joyful, some moments just confused, and very frustrated. And so I think that that's just pretty much characterized the last 8 to 10 weeks that I've felt. Today, I'm just feeling kind of tired. I think that comes with the territory, feeling pretty exhausted. But just knowing that it's waves, I think emotions are temporary. So I'm waiting for that hopeful and joyful wave to hit me again. And energized, hopefully comes sooner than later. But yeah, that's how I'm feeling. And also feeling like Helen is looking incredibly beautiful tonight. And so that gives me a little bit of joy.
Thank you. I'm all right, mostly because I get to work in a field where I have fabulous accomplices and allies. having meaningful work is no small thing in life. So I try to remind myself of that, even though it's quite difficult right now. But absolutely, as LaWanda said, just the roller coaster. I've probably been on a gradient of simmering anger that's escalating for several years now. That's probably not the healthiest thing. But then there's moments, like talking to a Black trans client this week who's like, "Did you see the Supreme Court ruling?" Like, okay, we have some of our victories. It's unfortunate we're shocked when the Supreme Court does something positive, but I'll take it.
Yes, no, I totally understand. And I thank you both for being so candid in your responses, because I think that sometimes it's really hard to think about how your clinician is feeling, or if you are a clinician, how you're feeling. We give a lot of space to our clients. And it's just refreshing to hear that other clinicians are feeling the same way. And kind of with that, I'm just thinking about jumping into some questions, and we'll start with you, Dr. Hill or LaWanda. Coming out of working with clients right now and seeing clients, I'm curious about how you would recommend to other clinicians engaging Black clients. And that's been a really, really popular conversation, a really popular topic. Just how do we engage our Black clients or our clients of color about George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, the protests, the racial trauma, just, these heavy loaded topics in general?
Yeah, I think this question always activates me in a lot of different ways, because it feels as if, like, I don't think this should be the first time that we should be engaging clients around Black lives, around racial injustice, around police brutality. And so while I appreciate, all of the energy around it and people getting on board with it, it is a point of frustration for me, because it feels like it shouldn't have taken all of this for us to be engaging race, because it's a part of our identity. And based on our racial identity, our gender identity, our sexual identity, we experience the world in very different ways. And so I feel like we should start by naming that. Like, before we to the conversation of exploring the global unrest, the murders of Breonna and George and Ahmaud, and just recently in Atlanta, we have to name the fact that, wow, if this is the case, right? So this is for all clinicians, but if it's the case where this is the first time where you find yourself feeling like, wow, we need to kind of discuss this, I would name it. I tell people, relationships, if there's some type of infidelity or some type of challenge, no one just moves on and goes straight to going back to life to normal. You have first to name what has happened, because the process is always happening. It's just a matter of if we choose to address it or not. So I would name the fact that this hasn't been a focus of conversation. We haven't engaged this topic, and this conversation may be difficult, or it could be awkward, or I may all right, but I think it's important to name the fact and have some accountability that this is conversation, and that does a number of that does, it's significant in repairing whatever potential rupture could have happened.
Right.
I think the second point to kind of broach the conversation would to just be based on, like, the earlier point, we're all experiencing this very differently. And so if you are Black identified, if you're Asian identified, or another POC, you're experiencing these murders in different ways, depending on how awakened you've been, or how kind of like maybe complicit you've been. And so I think to just name the fact that, wow, it's a lot happening right now, name the specific instances, I think is a good practice anyway, to just kind of address what's happening globally in therapy and give them an opportunity to respond to it. I remember doing that with the Kavanaugh case as well. And seeing where people go with it, because sometimes you're exhausted and you want to talk about it today, and then sometimes you want to talk about it today, and then sometimes you're speechless. So I would, my to be concise, would be to name the fact that, wow, if this is the first entry of conversation, let's have some accountability as to why. And then, sit with the clients and say, it's a lot happening, and I know that people are experiencing that in very different ways. And so can we explore the ways in which you may be, do you want to spend some time today exploring the ways in which it's impacting you?
No, I think that's amazing. And I think that we also have, when we have these conversations, we can promote more knowledge and supporting each other and our clients in a healthier way. And you find out whether or not, there are some clients who are willing to do more work and be more curious and educate themselves and become allies. And so I'm curious about that ally formation, and how, and I'm going to ask Dr. Hsu or Helen this question. How do you think our allies can confront and combat this feeling of like, well, I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say, or if I said something, I'm not sure if I would say it right, so I just kind of didn't say anything. How do we combat that mentality so that we're actually promoting more dialogue? What recommendations might you have for clinicians or other allies?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really common question. And we've seen it in individual relationships, friends, colleagues, but also systems, right? I have a friend who's a manager at a mental health place, and she said the administration's terrified. They don't know what to say, so they're saying nothing. And I always say, you have to remember that saying nothing is saying something. Right? That saying nothing says a lot about, we don't think this is important enough to face our own discomfort, right? Or to get help. Like, it's a good sign to say, like, I don't know how to talk about this, or I don't know a lot about this subject. Like, okay, do you care enough to maybe find out? Right? Do you care enough to like go into the awkward, bring in a consultant, get some help? It's like, I was talking to a client the other day who, again, had a perfectly nice therapist, but the client said, well, I just got the feeling there were things about myself or my identity I had to cut around to be okay. And I know the clinician, and she would never have wanted that. But by saying nothing, it created that feeling, that burden should be on, whether you're the therapist or in your leadership, to take on the awkward, take on the burden, and not let people who are suffering or have less power have to do that. And so really thinking about, how do I take that responsibility? And it doesn't have to be done smoothly or perfectly to just do it.
Yeah, so I love that you pointed out, like, not putting the burden on the people that are suffering. And I'm wondering if you both could actually speak to the phenomenon of waiting for the person of color to say something, or going to the person who is identified to make a comment, and then get this feeling of like, I'm tired. And how do you help people kind of understand what that I'm tired means?
I think it's loaded, and feel free to kind of interrupt me, Helen, and chime in. I think the phenomenon in and of itself is a centering of yourself, right? If you are I think about, our ethical code as psychologists and how we're supposed to do no harm, and we're supposed to kind of like facilitate wellness for people and treat people with dignity and be moving towards justice in a lot of ways. It feels as if your comfort is prioritized over someone else's experience. That to me feels like that's the phenomenon we're battling, right? I'm terrified because I don't know what to say. Well, then that's kind of still centering you. I don't know what to say because I may say the wrong thing. And if I say the wrong thing, that may have repercussions for me. But the person who's experiencing it, even if you said the wrong thing or you didn't say enough, you just acknowledge it. So I think the phenomenon to me explicitly is about centering yourself over the well-being of the client or the person.
Right.
If we can get to a place where we recognize that it's not about us and it's about our clients and it's about their experiences and it's about their challenges, then we can get beyond that hurdle of discomfort. And so like, that's the first thing that really rung out to me. Like, what's the phenomenon? Because I think about it a lot. Like, what keeps people from being able to say something? Like, what is really happening? And it must be the centering of yourself. I'm centering it. I don't know all of the nuances, of Asian culture or Asian American culture, but I know that xenophobia is a thing. And I know I may be misinformed, but if I am trying to center Helen and her well-being, then I'm going to at least broach the conversation and then rely on our relationship for her to say, well, actually, we don't call it, and we had this discussion, we don't call it Chinese New Year, we call it the Lunar New Year. Like, that makes sense. And so I think the phenomenon of what we're getting at is like being able to step out of yourself and not centering yourself, and really thinking about the well-being of the other person and whom you may be relying on to broach the conversation, or whom you may be terrified of their reaction to broach the conversation. That's a large part of the conversation. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty simple. I've pointed out, like, we had gone over with our staff, we explained the concept of emotional labor. What that is, what it looks like, and so created a norm of, like, you can ask somebody, do you have the bandwidth or the interest, or do we have the kind of relationship that you're willing to engage with this with me, and, like, it's okay to give permission or not. Right. Because there are a lot of people right now who are like, no, I don't have the bandwidth. I am the only person of color in my school or workplace or whatever. And right now there's lots of lists of other places you can go educate yourself, not create more labor fatigue on me, and it may be you, the being honest, you might be the only therapist or staff at your place, and people are coming to you, and you have to set some parameters around that.
Yeah, no, I think that taking care of yourself is super important. And for all those watching, if in need of resources, definitely check out what's in the chat, because it is going to be really supportive of the work that you're doing. And in relation to that question that I just asked, I am curious, Helen, if you can speak to what it is like for you being a therapist right now, being a person of color. Can you think of any successes or any challenges that have been unique to this moment for you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like, LaWanda, I've said, this is like a whole book in this last few months. But certainly for therapists also of other communities, right, that are not, that may be people of color, maybe immigrants, refugees, or not, but understanding where we're similar, but where we're very different, right? That sure, there's sort of this extra rise in racism and xenophobia for Asian Americans in this year, and yet for many, many years, right, like the Asian American Psychological Association supported Black Lives Matter at our first protest maybe 4 years ago. And the logic was like, yes, we face racism, but it's not the same, right? We are not getting pulled over. We are not getting murdered at the same rates. These things are real. Is there a space to acknowledge that and bring us to a place that we're not, getting split, these modern minority myths and that stuff? And how do we discuss that as a field? Agree, and then how do we center that with clients in a way that doesn't center us, right? Like, I don't need you to validate that, like, I'm a good ally if you don't care. But but I do need to somehow communicate, like, my interest, or that it's safe here,
right,
or not, right? Because I mean, as the saying goes, just because a person of color is your therapist doesn't mean they'll necessarily share the same views,
right?
And how do we sort of address that openly,
Oh, and I'm going to kind of deviate for just a brief second. I think the point that you made around the diversity within these groups, you have African American, you have Asian American, you have Latino American or Latinx, and there's so much variability. I'm just kind of curious if either of you have any thoughts on which terminology is best or appropriate versus just asking the person. I know.
I was just going to say that it's interesting. We're starting a person of color affinity group at Stanford, and this dialogue actually naturally emerged, right? Of like, okay, I don't consider myself African American, I consider myself Black, right? And then there was someone else who was saying, I'm not Latinx. She's like, I wonder, when did we become Latinx? She's like, I'm Mexican, right? And then, another one of my colleagues was like, yeah, South Asian, I'm Indian, like it is what it is. And so I feel like it has been, historical to kind of sanitize language sometimes, and make language inclusive, but it wasn't informed or decided on by that community. And then all of a sudden now we expect all those people in those communities, like, I have a best friend who's Dominican, and every time I refer her as Latinx, she's like, why do you keep saying that? And I'm like, I've been in academia for too long, so sorry. So I don't think it's an appropriate, I think there's no appropriate language, right? I think you should ask, how do you identify?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Helen, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, right. Because I often explain, for example, Asian American was a term and identity created out of political need. But in our home countries, we've been like at war with each other, so it's really where, and very recently, really this year, I've started to use BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, to really highlight the very, I think, the attention deserved by Black and Indigenous communities in particular. But that's also a newer term, and so where does the person actually identify? But related maybe to all of this, the umbrella, and a little bit your past question, is there a success or progress? I feel like, LaWanda and I started a decolonizing mental health group with the students, and I do feel like there is this movement among people about, I really want to examine internalized sexism and racism, colonial mentality that I've been taught, and really look at this in a critical way. I feel like that's more common now than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago by far.
Yes, which thankfully the dialogue is happening more frequently. It's unfortunate, the impetus for this much dialogue has to be the loss of life, or, I don't want to say MAGA, but, there's been, like you pointed out, a ton of instances of racism and xenophobia that are splattered all over social media. And so you see a wide variety of people taking positions and stances. And I wonder, and Dr. Hill, if you can speak to this a bit, how do you see your role with clients who come in and say things like all lives matter or blue lives matter, especially during a time like this?
I think that's a great question. I think I see my role is always to challenge the fragility and anti-Black sentiments that's inherent in that. And I can unpack what that means. Because when you say Black Lives Matter, no one ever said blue lives don't, or all lives don't, right? And so it fundamentally means that you have bought into this distortion or this distorted truth, which propaganda is. It takes the truth, it distorts it, it picks up a piece, and then it kind of centers that. And then based on our own fragility around race, we'll take race for this instance, around race, we then lean into that. So my feel is, incumbent upon therapists to lean into that and say, that's what's your understanding first of what it means to say Black Lives Matter. Help me understand what it means to say all lives matter or blue lives matter. And so in that response, we can both agree that the Black Lives Matter is never negating the fact that other lives matter, right? If you leaned into that so readily, then there is some level of anti-Black sentiment, some level of fragility that's coming up that I feel is important to explore, because that means that we're able to hop on a narrative that feels comfortable for us without doing the research. What was the research? What does this mean? What is it saying? What is it not saying? And then how easily was it for me to lean into a meme, really, a distortion of that narrative? And I think that's the heart of the work right there.
Yeah. And everyone has their position, and supporting them and really creating that dialogue, I think, is so important. And I'm thinking, for Helen, could you speak to some of the ways that our white therapists can actually, use their position of privilege to support and advocate for, I'm going to use the term you use, Black, Indigenous people of color, or BIPOC, because they are in a unique position right now. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always tell people to think of everything in change as in stages, right? That very rigid black and white thinking has always been a bane of progress. And so even being an ally, there's sort of stages to that. But every movement has always really needed and benefited from allies, whether it's LGBT, civil rights. And so this movement, there is a place for white people. I think some people feel very defensive, everything I do is bad now because I'm white. I have all this privilege just by existing, and that seems like everything's bad. And it's well, but you can wield that privilege, right? Whether that's in the workplace, do you stop people from interrupting someone, or are you taking a role in making sure we think about what we're teaching or how we're hiring?
Mhm.
Do you bring up the things that nobody's mentioning maybe in a case consult? A common example is like referring to somebody's race or culture as being as if it's an innate problem with them as opposed to an environmental problem.
Right.
Right? Like, how are we diagnosing and thinking about situations? And white people who are educated can be very influential in for clients. Like, I always remember having an Asian American client, young man once, who had a lot of internalized racism, a lot of struggles being bicultural, he and his parents who are immigrants not sharing views, and a lot of negative feelings. And actually having a white therapist explore with him that, like, your parents may not do it in the way you like, but there's these other ways they show their love. For him, it was like a revelation to see that validated by like a white mainstream man. And it really helped him look at his own internalized racism, and so there are ways actually that there's an important role.
Well, I 100% agree. Like being able to have that dialogue and hold its role. And I would want to make sure that, white people who are desiring to affect change are also demonstrating an advocacy. Like we as a culture can't do this alone. And I think it should be a huge Herculean effort by all people to affect that change. And in making change, there often is experiences, some good, many bad. And as clinicians, we experience our own trauma. And I'm curious, Dr. Hill, whether could you speak to, and I'm going to apologize. I'm trying to fight this formal urge of saying, so I'm going to pick one in my mind right now and say, LaWanda, could you speak to just any of your experiences with trauma as a therapist of color, and how you've moved toward resilience under those circumstances?
Yeah, I think one of my colleagues / friends who's also a Black psychologist who one of her areas of specialty is trauma said about a month ago, and it really resonated with me. She was like, when we think about post-traumatic stress disorder, she's like, there's no post-trauma for Black people. It really resonated with me because I was like, yeah, we're always amid it. And so my experience has been like, I'm always in traumatic experiences. Either I have to convince you that Black Lives Matter, or either your racial conditioning and your unconscious bias precludes you from being able to hear my voice, validating my truth, or either I'm being policed. I've had, a simple example of going to the grocery store, being on the phone, trying to take the cart back to the area where you park the cart. The person I'm talking to is like, it's too loud in the background. Can you stop? So I was like, okay, cool. I'll leave the cart here. And having white men come up to me and was like, why are you leaving that cart there? You need to take it where it belongs. So this constant policing of me as a Black body, or the spoken person who you want me to educate you on what it means to be Black right now and the trauma we face. There's just ongoing trauma that not only am I a first responder to attend to with my clients, but I am not exempt from it myself. And so my experience has been like, this is exhausting on so many different levels, because in this marathon of social justice and equity, I am carrying this gun and running this race for too long. That could help me recover from my trauma.
We missed that last part. There was a little bit of background, but it was poignant and I wanted to make sure we caught it. So if you don't mind, could you repeat that?
Yeah, like the part about the marathon, the race, like I was saying, like this marathon of racial justice, social justice, equity, and inclusion is supposed to be a relay in which I can pass it to you, I can pass it to Helen, I can pass it to white allies or other POCs. But so often the apathetic response or the complicity to what's happening makes me have to run longer and further with more and be more wounded. And that takes its toll over time. And on top of that, now I have to respond and show up for my other Black clients, because who's going to show up for them? So, I mean, that's been with the trauma. I think is there. It's always there. It's lingering. I like activated fight or flight in the face of racial trauma. Strong emotions. I know about skewed perspectives of the world and people. I like startle response of like, oh, police officer behind me, I immediately starts to sweat into this, like, so that I know that there's trauma there. My body keeps the count.
Right.
And resilience has just been, and we could talk a little bit more about this. To me, resilience is just about how do I cope? How do I recover? Because I think resilience only works if there's adequate recovery time. And so being able to understand that this is part of my truth and part of my reality, unfortunately, doing what I need to do to retreat from these very toxic places and spaces that activate this trauma for me to be able to adequately recover from it all. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's, that comment that you said your colleague made about it, there is no post for, people of color. It is super important. Just hits the nail right on the head, because there is a very, there's just exhaustion in having to be present, and then also be present for yourself. And if you have a family, be present for your family. So there's real importance in being able to make space for yourself so that you can, as Dr. Patricia Smith would say, find that, compassion, satisfaction, so you can continue to go out and do the work. And I'm just thinking, like, in order to create that space, you probably have to do self-care and some self-reflection. And Helen, could you speak to why it might be so important for therapists in particular to self-reflect and to self-care, particularly in such a charged system right now where we're talking about racism, systemic racism, xenophobia, and the like?
I mean, it's always like we manage this supposed boundary between our professional and our personal lives, our clients. It's an unusual situation that there's so much traumatic stress going on in a large scale, and that your clients know that you're in it too. They know. I've never had so many clients as I have had these last few months be like, and how are you? Let's go there, because I'm also experiencing all this. We're all in this. Let's be real and authentic, right? That's what therapy is about.
Right.
And we're supposed to be modeling, right? What is the self-care? How am I coping? There was, when I was in grad school, I often had psychosomatic illnesses from just like 5 years of no sleep and not doing the greatest job of self-care. And I'll always remember a client who was very severely, chronically mentally ill. She was often had psychotic symptoms, a very long-term client. But I'll always remember one day as she was leaving, she turns around and she goes, you're not looking so good. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so right,
Wow.
Like, and it really was like, you have to try your best to model what you're trying to teach, right? How do you pace yourself? How do you rejuvenate responsibly?
Yeah, I think there, I don't know if either of you have seen this meme, but there's a meme out where there are two paintings. One is of a woman doing yoga, and it's how therapists recommend their clients, rejuvenate and self-care. And then in the other painting, it's a woman sitting on a couch watching TV, eating like a tub of ice cream. And it's like that therapist's reality in terms of self-care.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's a bit of both. It's really important to really find ways of caring for yourself. But some days, if you just want to have your ice cream and just veg out, that is also self-care too. And we can't always put together 24/7. Like, and I think there's an issue there too, in terms of just people of color and presentation, always feeling like you have to be put together or look a certain way, otherwise you won't be accepted, or you fit the description, those types of situations. And I think if anyone has ever seen the show Black AF, like, I think he does a great job in one of the opening episodes about addressing this paranoia, I think, that people of color often develop. Like, if I don't look a certain way, if I don't have certain things, if I don't, present a certain way, how are people going to think about me? How are they going to engage with me? So really, you speaking to that, I think, is really important. And I just in terms of, both not just how you present, but like reflecting and finding self-care, also identifying. LaWanda, you pointed out, like, you know what your symptoms would be if you're experiencing PTSD. The only you self-reflect. So really underscoring that for clinicians to take the time to really make space for yourself so that you know how you respond and when you're being triggered. And, you know, with the reflection, with the self-care, I'm just wondering, Helen, if you can also speak to what some of the ways therapists can manage their own emotional labor and stress might be, and just even the learning right now, because for some it is a pretty learning curve.
Yeah, it's a lot to learn. And I think, you know, so that piece not to feel guilty about, like I often point out to people, when I was in grad school, we didn't have words like cultural humility, cultural responsiveness. That was all new. You know, we didn't have Latin or Filipinx, we didn't have by POC, you know, so it's okay to constantly learn and not know everything. And really, you know, there's individual self-care. I mean, LaWanda and I are huge on like physical exercise is essential. I'll know if I'm not exercising enough because I get really cranky. But even who you're around and what you need, right? Like we're fortunate enough to be in a place that we have some colleagues that like can reflect, support, discuss. Not everybody has that. You may be in private practice or you may be in an environment that is not supportive. Right? And the exhaustion of, you may be supporting a client, but you're also in a hostile workplace. And finding that. So, for example, my involvement with the Minority Fellowship Program at APA or with Asian American Psych Association, and we partner with like ABPSI, the Black Psychologists, LPA, Society of Indian Psychologists. That kind of feels professional, like networking, but actually I leave those spaces and I feel restored.
Yeah.
So I think finding your people, you know, if you don't have it where you live or where you work, there are people out there who've created resource lists, things. You don't have to do it all yourself. There are people there who will like validate support, who've been in this struggle for years. And so finding those spaces, I think, is super important.
And I would ask LaWanda too, if you can speak a little bit to, you know, finding your spaces and connecting. I think sometimes clinicians, I want to say more seasoned clinicians more often feel like they have gotten it down. We're good. I got this. I don't need any help. And they tend to not connect with the communities and replenish themselves. Like, I'm curious if you could speak to the importance and how you would recommend clinicians reaching out and connecting with their community.
I think it's very important. It's actually one of the ways in which I engage in self-care. I think I identify as part of a collectivist culture. And I think that the first battle is to kind of colonialism, where you kind of buy into individualistic culture, whereby you're supposed to be the person who is going to be it for yourself, right? You're going to be responsible for overcoming. You're going to be responsible for coping. Self-care sounds self. It's just, you know, you're taking care of yourself. Also, there is a space for you to be able to join a community. And so for me, I think it's about like recognizing people, seeking a group of people. And so, or sometimes for me, you know, it's a certain phenomenon called Black girl magic, Black magic, Black joy is a form of resistance. And so, and that is not to exclude like other allies. Like I know Helen to be a person that I can like go have self-care with, and she gets it. But I think first is kind of like turning into your culture. Like people who have the same experiences as you, who identify with you, who share the same values, who you don't have to explain. You know, if I say to you, I don't have to go into the nuts and bolts of what that meant to me at Safeway because you've experienced it 1,000 times.
Right.
And we're just kind of like disconnect from it. And so sometimes that's your own culture, and sometimes that's a group of allies of people who get it and they're experiencing their own level of xenophobia, racism, hurt, homophobia, transphobia, and we can just kind of gather together. I think it's very important to spend time trying to figure out who shares the same values as you. You know, that look like you, those people may not look like you. Who share the same values, who gets it, who understands that we're in this together, that we're interdependent and not independent. Right. Ways can I like engage you in a way that's going to be fulfilling to me. Experiencing racial trauma at work, it was an instance in which I like opened up my door and Helen had dropped some food right there, like just outside my door. And it felt like food. I need food. I need culture. I need people who get it. I need food. I need to feel better. And I don't have to explain anything. She just understood it. And so I think to answer your question, just understanding that there are certain people who understand your plight. They may have a different plight themselves, but they understand yours. And they have empathy and they have the same values and they're working toward the same goal, but they also understand the importance of being interdependent because we can't do this by ourselves. We just can't.
Well, and I think you're right. Absolutely 100%. And the whole dependent, I hate this phrase, but pull yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. It really frustrates me that like this is still promoted to this day. Nobody does anything by themselves, but yet, you have these high ranking professionals who are quick to say, well, I did this all on my own. With that, I just wanted to have both of you speak to this idea that if you are seeking support and you happen to turn into your culture, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're excluding others. Just kind of similarly, that Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that phenomenon or perception that as people turn into themselves, it means there's an exclusion.
I mean, we can never talk about decolonizing or anti-racism for long before we get into like capitalism, right? Like, what are the reasons that our communities have been split, that we've been trained up to see everybody as like competition, and the ways that ultimately winds up causing a lot of harm in different levels. So I think there really is something to look at there, which is a whole other conversation. But, even this idea about like what's professional ethics. Ethnic minority psych associations, I've been a part of this, have been in dialogue with APA for about 9 years. We're like about a decade overdue for an ethics code update.
Right.
And for these 9 years, we've been stuck on the fact that like it never says our professional ethics code is Western individualized, but it is.
Yes.
And how is that not working for the health and wellness of our clients and ourselves and our communities that just don't function that way, that know how to heal and grow in a communal way.
And I would add, in terms of like the perception of people feeling excluded, it kind of goes back to my original point of like, it's still self-centered. Is me turning into my community? How does my self-care and the way in which I carry that out suddenly turn into how you were excluded? Right? Or suddenly turn into ways in which you are being not a part of the conversation? Because if you truly understanding that self-care looks different for different people, and that bring that to different people, and that some things you just don't have the same experience, right? That there's going to be some things that you're not going to be able to get. I think I want to get at that perception by asking the question, like, what activates that reaction? What activates that reaction is the true point of self-reflection. Because if you wanted to be with your primary family, right? If there was an issue going on with your family right now, your nuclear family, and you all wanted to talk inwardly, or you made a public statement about anything, wow, she's excluding me from this conversation. It would just be understood that this is certain things in-house, or certain things just happens and it's discussed between your primary family, and then you have extended family. The notion applies, but when it comes to, I think, racial and ethnic identity, we want to be more critical about it, and we want to scrutinize it, and we want to police it more. And I'm always curious as to where that's coming from. And that when it comes to the conversations.
Yeah, and on the same note, I'm kind of thinking about the experience of racism, and as people are feeling like excluded or feeling like there's a group that's getting more resources, it feels like that becomes this fire underneath this flame of, or under the cloud or smoke of racism. And I'm wondering, LaWanda, if you can speak to whether or not you feel racism is a mental health issue. Is it our job as clinicians, as therapists, to address and bring into therapy that racism is a thing, and to really kind of help untangle that web.
Absolutely. Period. Exclamation point. Racism is systematic, it's structural. It exempts people from opportunities, it discriminates, it gaslights, it causes symptoms of isolation, depression, clinical symptoms, non-clinical symptoms. It disrupts people's livelihood. We start talking about structural policies that exclude people and people of color from advancing. You're talking about a system that hits at multiple aspects of the self. Personal, your capacity to earn, your capacity to excel, your capacity to be able to attend to your family or yourself. So when we're talking about racism, we're talking about a direct hit to mental health, right? That is affecting me on a day-to-day basis. Any hit to my mental health, any hit to my wellness is a clinical issue, period. And I think if we don't understand that on a global level, then we need to revisit the drawing board, because just because we can't say that my experience of not knowing or understanding racism makes it global for everybody or generalized for everybody.
Right.
We know in group differences, we know that there are within group differences. And if we don't I actually think it's negligent, to be completely honest. I think it's negligent to not into racism as a mental health issue, because then you just cut out a significant portion of people that would experience it, and that is negligent.
And on that same note, how would you kind of describe supporting our Black colleagues and patients right now? And what are some things that you would say, and what are some things that you would say, I wouldn't say that?
When you say support, can you say a little bit more about what you mean?
Well, like, in these situations, how would you help, either whether it's phrases, because I staunchly believe that it's helpful to give people like narratives, and for people to practice using those narratives so that they're not caught off guard and then frozen, and it's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, and then they don't say anything at all. But also to think about ways of helping them think more broadly. So it's not just thinking about what statement you're going to make, but what ways you might educate yourself, or what ways you might offer resources to help educate others, so that it doesn't fall solely on those in the Black and Brown community to do that work. So in terms of supporting those clinicians or supporting other colleagues and being allies, how might you go about doing that?
Okay, I see. I would say I would start by kind of like sitting with the truth that nobody escapes racial conditioning. None of us. Nobody escapes racial conditioning. Nobody escapes socialization around gender. Around, you pick a topic of life, escapes that socialization. There's constant messages. They're implicit. They're explicit. They're conscious. They're unconscious. They're sometimes overt. They're covert. That we all have internalized those, right? So I understand that I may have been socialized or conditioned in a certain way that's very circumscribed to maybe my experience as a person, as a white person, person of color, Black, Indigenous. Then now I need to kind of figure out what is the world outside of my experience that I may not be aware of. Let me diversify perhaps maybe my interpersonal relationships, people I follow. Social media makes it easy. How do I diversify? How do I join in some conversations? How do I go to some different conferences? So maybe entertain the idea that not everybody buys into a heteronormative, cis, white dominant worldview. That's step one. And if I could then begin to figure out, right, in the age of digital age, resources are like abundant. You can't no longer say you don't have those resources. So start anywhere of acknowledging the fact that I've been conditioned in a certain way. And that's myself included as a cisgender heterosexual Black female. There are certain scripts and narratives that are just not in my awareness related to people who don't fall into that paradigm. And so if I'm having clients across the spectrum who are not in this identity, educate myself. How do I figure out what biases may have come from my socialization? How do I understand what prejudice? Because we all have them. I think that's step one. We don't want to admit that we have them.
Well, I think you're right. And just even starting with that, I don't know, while there are many opportunities to educate yourself and to, you know, look online. I'm also really hesitant to say look online because there's a lot there that I would shake my head at and be like, no,
a reputable source. Yeah,
right.
Source. Yeah, I mean, like there was a good question that came up in the chat, right? Like you want to ask questions and be curious and be sincere, but then you also don't want, say, your Black client or colleague to feel like I'm asking for emotional labor, right? And, you know, and I think where do we all help is like, what are the reputable sources of resources? Pursuing those, checking in and asking permission a lot sincerely. You know, like, is it okay to ask this? Is this a good time or absolutely not? But not to assume, right? Like when I said earlier, it's you want to improve and be an ally, but not center yourself. Right. That it's not about serving my needs more than yours. You know, in the Twitterverse, right after, you know, the protests were going out, I mean, and I save vignettes and quotes from real people who've had negative racist experiences in therapy.
Right.
So I use those in training a lot. We can hurt people, even though that's not our intent. And we have to like be mindful of that. You know, and so in the last few weeks, like one person who was a Black client said they'd been with their white therapist for months, things have been fine. And they showed up that day and their therapist was like, can you explain to me like what's going on with all this? And she was out. That was it. She wasn't even going to have that discussion about, you know, you're asking me to center you instead of asking me, how am I feeling about these traumatic events, you know, like all this.
Well, it speaks to the leakage, and this is, you know, really important in terms of the question around self-reflection, right? You have to know how you were triggered, and if you're not in your own therapy, definitely seek therapy, connect with your colleagues. Like there's a reason why, you know, these are resources and they're recommendations from clinicians to clients. Like we're human, we're no different than anyone else. And I think that, you know, acknowledging our, you know, at the time I was in grad school, we called it our blind spots. Like they're not just spots. There are really large maps of things that we don't know. And acknowledging that, I think helps others to feel like, you know what, you're not trying to put me in a box, you're trying to understand versus just feeling like they're forced into something. And, you know, I'm curious for either of you to speak to what you feel actually promotes change, and especially in this climate. Like what helps people to counter their racist tendencies?
Wow, that's a really good question. My immediate reaction is I think change is birthed from discomfort. I don't think if we're comfortable, we're not changing. And so I think to be able to, for me, you have to move from the cognitive to the emotional. Like we can intellectually understand something all day, every day. But once it becomes emotionally uncomfortable, and once we start really wrestling with the ways in which we contribute to hurt, or that we can, I've hurt person as a licensed clinician in Texas and California, I have contributed to someone's harm. That's uncomfortable to say, right? Starting point, knowing in a vulnerable state, they came to me and needed me to execute. And in some ways, because of the ways in which I have, you know, these growth edges or the ways in which I've been conditioned, I've contributed to their harm. Wow, that's incredibly uncomfortable. That goes against what I fundamentally believe in. Now, what am I going to do to alleviate that discomfort? How am I going to grow? How am I going to stick with this discomfort so that I don't perpetuate it again? I don't think we want to be uncomfortable. And I think if we are for change to happen, we have to be. I think that's a good starting point at the very minimum.
Sure. No, I agree. Helen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, right. Like when we were discussing even say white fragility at work, we spent a long time just on the black and white binary, the good bad binary. Right? That if we can't accept that we can be like mostly good, but still, you know, have growth edges, you can't grow. Right. So I totally agree with that. Is like needing to get comfortable in the gray. And remembering that on a systemic and structural level, establishing trust and rapport is a dance and a process. You know, as individual therapists, I think we kind of know how to do that. And how do we use those skills in a bigger way? How do we actually show that we deserve trust? You know, it's by showing up that these things heal. When somebody says, yeah, this guy told another man to stop interrupting me in a meeting, you know, like he's actually showing, instead of like letting this guy interrupt me and then telling me later, yeah, he was rude. Well, that's not helping me, you know, like
Right.
we actually show that like we're here, you know. Or I have a friend right now who's been sharing publicly some pretty traumatic experiences he had with police brutality, and he's white. And he's putting it out there because he says he knows. A lot of times people just don't believe Black people. They have to hear from someone that's like them, which is ridiculous and messed up, but he's putting that effort, right? And so how do we make these repairs? It has to be in the feeling. It has to be real, not intellectual.
Yeah.
And we all have to be comfortable with a little gray.
Well, and I 100% agree. And the reason why I think this is a really poignant question at this time is right now, hashtag BLM is everywhere. And to some degree, I'm very appreciative of the efforts and that people are jumping on this, you know, hashtag. But at the same time, it feels like there are some people that are using it as just that, as a hashtag, and that they aren't showing up and they aren't actually being allies. It's just a trending topic. So in terms of thinking about change, I wonder what you both would, or how you both think, or what you would say to how change is organized. Would you recommend, and I think we even had a comment of having like some sort of checklist in relation to kind of experiences of how we want to go about change, you know, not just protesting, but protesting. And so what would you promote or say to how that change would take place?
My immediate reaction is that, you know, it's now safe to say Black Lives Matter. It's now safe to say BLMX, or, you know, Black Lives Matter, hashtag, whatever. I think the ways in which we go about change is like, when is it going to be, when it's risky, right? When there could be some social backlash, or when it may cost you, because equity would require that you understand, number one, that things have been unjust and unequally distributed, and be willing to give some of that. And that requires risk and discomfort. Right. And so for me, change is about, you know, it's ongoing or sustainable change is when this dies down and when it's no longer socially acceptable, or people have moved on, which has been our experience, or my experience, you know, as a Black female. Like, people move on. It's just a hashtag. And are you still willing to have that same level of risk? Are you still willing to be uncomfortable? Are you still willing to, as Helen said, you know, be in a relationship and show that you're worthy of trust? That to me is sustainable change. It's understanding that sometimes people may not be, and that still is part of the change, because people haven't caught up, you know, or it is risky. And I say risky not in the sense of like, it could be in the sense of like your life, but like risky in the terms of like social capital, how people feel about you, think about you. You have to take a stance on something. You have to have a position on something. And I feel like sustainable change to me is knowing where your position is and seeing it through, even if globally people are on board, or only a subsection of people are on board.
Like, I appreciate that. For example, some of our colleagues have a sort of accountability white affinity discussion group, right? So they're taking their own time and space to read and discuss, instead of expecting that to come from, say, you know, the staff of color. And that is happening in our field. So like Association of College Counseling Outreach, they put out a white discussion and accountability group, and they thought that maybe they'd get 12 people. They literally got like 100 responses. So people actually looking for a space, like, okay, like I'm seeing that I have growth edges, and that has to be my work instead of being putting on somebody else. So that is like very constructive. There are spaces to do this kind of work, and see it through. Like, how do we do it long term, right? When it's not just trendy. And as LaWanda said, getting to the discomfort part, then you probably know you're doing a good job. I've mentioned that really when the Asian American Psychology Association took a very public stand to go to a protest for Black Lives Matter in Colorado, like for me, that was the beginning of receiving a lot of pretty nasty interactions on a much elevated level. But it actually just drove home to me even more how important that is. Like seeing like, wow, this is a reaction you get if you wear a Black Lives Matter shirt in public, or if you post this thing on social media, strangers are going to be sending you shady tweets, but underscores like why this is important, but how you might need to seek support if this is an experience for you. Right? Like, what if your relatives are giving you a hard time, and can you hold your ground? I mean, I'm very proud that a lot of our students and community members who are Asian American have asked for spaces to discuss their own anti-Blackness or that in their families, right, and do that work. But there's work, and there's sometimes like small or large sacrifice.
Right.
I think in another training I mentioned having an opportunity at one point to be to be the committee chair on a committee at APA. And at the time I was like super flattered, but then I turned it down because it was an LGBTQ committee, and I felt that the chair really should be somebody strongly identified that community, And so that also means, right, if you're going to be an ally, you need to get off the stage and not center yourself.
Yeah, it's so, it's interesting that you bring that point. Like, sometimes there's the argument that, the ally should be doing more advocacy. And then there's the argument of, no, this should be a person of color. So just in general, I think you're probably both aware of Zoom just hired a Black diversity, chief diversity officer, just prior to all of the civil unrest. And the question, of course, loomed like, is this person being tokenized, right? Like, we're bringing him in to teach diversity, inclusion, and equity. And the question is, like, can he, if he is a person of color and is presenting almost often to a large, group of white men or white women, like, is he going to be able to affect that change? So I'm curious with your positions on, like, who do you think would be one of the best representatives to kind of support facilitating that change?
People who are self-aware and informed. And that could look a variety of, that could come in all race, ethnic, gender, identities alike. I think there's a piece of me that feels like there are certain experiences as a Black female or Asian female that I can't speak to when I'm speaking to maybe like a predominantly white audience, say, a queer audience. And I don't pretend to be an expert in that. And so I think that that's why we need to stop hiring individual directors, and we need to start thinking about teams. Teams where people have a number of different voices and can speak to a number of different experiences. I also feel like it's nuanced. It's very complex. I think it's dangerous, actually, to be able to join in a group of people who have not been aware of their racial conditioning, the ways in which they invoke harm, and have a conversation with other people of color or Black, Indigenous people in the room who've lived that all of their lives. And so I think that it's also harmful, equally harmful, to have a Black identified or a person of color facilitate that dialogue and be met with so much resistance and so much. I think that is where white allies can come in, who are self-aware and informed and knowledgeable. And this happens, at Stanford all the time. I feel very incredibly fortunate and blessed to have people who understand that. And therefore, these whiteness and accountability groups are facilitated by people who are white and well-informed and get it, do that emotional labor. Then our diversity, equity, inclusion is facilitated by a team of people who represent a number of different identities, because I can't speak to the specific ways in which xenophobia may impact the Asian American community, but I can speak to anti-Blackness as a Black person.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of get to this space where we understand that these are nuanced experiences of people, and one person being the voice for everyone is just not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective of a team approach and bringing people together to have the dialogue. And this has been a recurring theme through the discussion of connecting with your community, reaching out and getting support. How would you recommend that clinicians who are really wanting to carry this forward actually maintain these dialogues so that they're not only continuing to support education, but they are also continuing to build resiliency?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's in your life, right? Whether it's your family, your chosen family, your workplace, your spiritual place, like finding where is the place that you can continue this work. And it may be in different places, right? If your workplace isn't able to provide this kind of community, can you find it in a professional networking group? Before I was deeply involved in these like national psych associations, when I first graduated, it was like 5 of us who would meet at least monthly for dinner to talk about what's going on with starting our practices, what are we seeing in the community, what's happening with us. So whatever form that is for you, you know, small to other things, staying, you know, open to just that constant cultural humility mindset. I often say, like, I get invited to teach about multicultural issues or cultural responsiveness, and I'll often say, like, I'm still learning, you know. Even being the president of the Asian American Psych Association, like, I don't know about every kind of Asian, you know, and I don't represent them all, and like that's the norm. But I know it feels overwhelming sometimes. But I do think if we really get good at responsiveness and cultural humility, it transfers. Right? Like what I learned about inter-Asian diversity has helped me with the queer community, has helped me, like, I think my latest biggest growth area is really thinking about ableism and the ways that creates sort of our daily life and environment. So it kind of transfers a bit. So at least in that sense, to not feel completely overwhelmed, like I'm never going to grasp every intersectional thing that's going on for my clients. Like, of course not, but it starts to transfer a little bit. Yeah.
And it's a tall order to try and actually do that, you know, like to try and be all-knowing, essentially. Like that's just not really good practice. And it really takes away from the term practice. The reason why is like psychologists have practices, or even attorneys have practices, is because you never master anything. You constantly are learning and growing. And just as you think you've got it, something new comes out, and you're should be led by the research. So, you know, just kind of thinking about our discussion, I'm kind of curious if anyone in our audience has questions, because just as we've talked about reaching out to our community, I want to be able to give them a voice and see if there's anything that they have thoughts or questions on. And even as I'm waiting for them to kind of share, you know, if they have questions, are there particular thoughts or points that we may not have addressed and you want to bring to the table in terms of discussing?
I mean, I do think it's interesting that one thing we've discovered with shelter in place is, as we've transitioned to like Zoom life, that there are struggles with that and fatigue and all that, but that it really is a good way of thinking about, you know, if you're a clinician in a very isolated place, there are more ways now to access like learning opportunities and communities than there were in the past. And I think that is actually a plus.
Yes. Well, I haven't seen any questions, but I can always generate lots of questions. And I'm just curious for both of you in terms of, you know, one, sheltering in place. I mean, this is kind of like the perfect storm of situations, and it is kind of crazy making to some degree. As you guys are dealing with all of these things, you spoke to this a little bit. How are you taking care of yourselves and really building your resilience?
I'm trying to stay active. It's three things I think that's helping me. I'm trying to have adequate recovery, because I think resilience sometimes get co-opted to believe that we need to just push through, and we can't unless we actively pause to recover. So I've been really trying to pause to recover, be in community, virtually, and stay active. Like, I think being active and working out releases my own endorphins. It helps me release any anger. It helps me move through a number of emotions. I get a lot of clarity when I run. And so, like, that helps. And just being in community, I think the beauty, me and one of my best friends was joking, it's like we've taken it all the way back to middle school. We're just on the phone for hours talking about nothing. And so one of the beauties of this is just kind of like that to remember, like, whoa, we probably do need to pause and not try to be so productive all the time and engage in this capitalistic culture, but to kind of retreat to community and retreat to conversations, because those relationships are what's going to sustain you. Hit with multiple different things, and trying my best to create as much virtual community as I possibly can, because I understand that we're interpersonal and relational beings, and we thrive in relationship with people. And so those have been my three ways of just kind of like having the ongoing trauma.
Yeah. I think being grounded and active, right? The reality of the fact that we hold stress and trauma in our bodies. Fundamentally, I talk with our clients a lot about starting to notice your warning signs, like I'm getting crabby, I'm getting a neck ache, I'm not waiting until you're really having a full-on breakdown before you get support, but like noticing those signs. And I've gotten good at that because my body will tell me, like, yeah, it's not and so a lot of that preventative stuff, another colleague of ours, Dr. Floro, and I just did a talk actually for our recreation part of Stanford about like maximizing your mind-body wellness, right? Are you in tune with what you need? What are the practices you have? That's cultural too, right? That a lot of us who are BIPOC have ancient healing practices that have been sort of shoved aside, but that actually fundamentally can still really be a part of like self-care and wellness, a lot of ancient knowledge. We don't have to wait until we get sick with something diagnosable. And I think also focusing your work, there's so much to be done right now. I know a lot of people feel flooded, overwhelmed. And I always say, well, the work's always going to be there. So right, long after like the trendy hashtag is over, there's still a lot of work. So pace yourself, right? Pace yourself and think about your focus. Like I was asked if I wanted to do something, for example, with a professional organization, and I consulted with a good friend of mine. And he said, I think you'd be great. What is it you want to focus on? And he said, for example, he had decided recently that he didn't want to spend his limited time and energy on professional orgs as much anymore. He really wanted to support the community. And that was super helpful for me. I really think like with all this going on in the world right now, I'm really less interested in putting stuff into this professional org. I'm really trying to focus on like mentoring because they give me hope.
Right.
And then more on clinical because I feel like that's applied and that's where I'm at. So choosing your focus.
And I think that's such a great kind of point for, our listeners, for clinicians in general. In many dialogues with like trainees and, early career psychologists or, early career therapists, there feels like there's such a pressure to just get out there and do that people don't feel like they're honing in on a particular arena or even know, like, I don't know what my focus is. I just know I need to pay my loans. So I think in terms of resiliency, really being able to take a step back, focusing in on what you feel that would be most, nurturing for you as the individual, and having very clear boundaries. I feel like boundaries never get enough discussion in terms of our work, because appropriate boundaries really do help nurture resilience, really do help build our ability in this work. So yeah, I think those are amazing ways that I'm hearing that you guys are reaching out and taking care of yourself. I'm curious if we can play, not storyteller, I'm thinking it's end of the day, so my brain is starting to shut down.
There's a couple of questions over here that I just saw. Did you see those about decolonizing?
I just got one.
And I was like, I think I'll just put our link there. But you could talk about it. And then our video is also here. I'll put that in.
Yes. So, oh, she just posted. Decolonizing therapy and wondering what that really means. So, do you want to speak a little bit to it for those who may not have time to rush over to the video?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's tough to sit with the fact that colonization comes with this idea of basically like white dominant values that are like heteronormative in nature, cisgender in nature, and a lot of the ways in which we approach treatment, specifically mental health, right? So talking about mental healthy approaches comes from that perspective. It is not always, for instance, one of the things about self-care that I've even missed is spirituality. Mm-hmm. That's not center in mental health, right? That's not something that we bring in the room, because some of our evidence-based manuals, some of our approaches to treatment are really looking inherently at the person, or looking for the person as the symptom, not looking at the systems that play a role, not engaging those cultural practices that are specific to culture, not recognizing, even the ideal of cultural competence versus cultural humility is colonized, and that we arrive at this state of competence in culture versus understanding that we're constantly arriving. So I would say, Harsha, it's really this ideal of kind of taking a step back of all the ways in which, like a white dominant culture permeates the mental health field, our approach to treatment, the boundaries that we hold or the boundaries that we don't hold, what we choose to self-disclose, what we choose not to really understand that, and to kind of decolonize, basically deconstruct some of these narratives, some of these truths. Helen alluded to it earlier about the ethical code being, 10 years overdue to being revised, because a lot of the boundaries that, that is put forth to kind of uphold for Black females, who is like 90% of my practice, doesn't relate to our culture. Mm-hmm. Ways in which we kind of take a look at, wow, like that may be universal or may be applicable to your culture, but it's not applicable to mine. And that to me is a piece of decolonizing. I don't know if you would add something to that. But.
Yeah. About ethics, I just want to put out there that A.B. Psy and SIP, Black psychologists, and the indigenous, they call Indian psychologists, they actually have their own ethics code now. Their websites really look at that and what those values are that ground them. But it goes deep, right? Especially if you're doing deep work and you get into trauma or intergenerational trauma, then this idea of decolonizing, right? Like, we tend to work with younger people at Stanford, but like what it's like to sit with someone who's realizing that maybe their obsession with a certain body type or the way they look or talk is rooted as far back as their parents or grandparents who suffered under colonialism, who were made to feel lesser if they were dark-skinned or had an accent or whatever. How deep that is, in our colorism, our sexism. So it's really trying to help deconstruct how are a person's values and health doing. And often it's not doing so great under a lot of colonized mentality, because then it breeds a lot of something's wrong with me, constant imposter syndrome, body dysmorphia. A lot of those things are not always, but very frequently tied to trauma and colonial history and capitalist exploitation. Yeah, that's a whole class. So you can read up on that. But that's kind of what we're talking about, is trying to help people see, as I said to one student once, I'm like, if you want to do cosmetic surgery because you want to, that is your choice. My opinion has no place in this. But I want us to talk about the ways that I'm concerned some of why you feel the way you do about yourself is internalized racist garbage. From what you and your family have experienced. And I want us to fully explore some of this before you make like a life-altering decision.
Right.
I think it's, great that you guys are able to speak to the, perspective of having colonization within, because it does permeate like every facet of the American culture. And the idea of, us even talking about BIPOC or using these umbrella terms to kind of categorize an entire people is really reflective of that. Like, there really shouldn't be an umbrella term. You are who you are. But it's I don't want to say it's easy to kind of fall into that, but it has been something that, we have all had training in and was part of our experience. So the efforts that you guys are making to really deconstruct that and create new narratives, I think is absolutely amazing. And we do have a question from Marissa Hutterer, if I said that correctly. Just thinking about, I'm sorry, from Melissa Lomax, and we'll also piggyback into Melissa's question. Just thinking about organizations and what their leaders can do to fix their workplace culture. I know, Helen, you spoke a little bit about that earlier, and I'm curious from both of you if you could speak to what ways leaders can support without it looking contrived. I think particularly where it's like, oh, well, here's this person, come talk. Like, how do you demonstrate that you are with your team and supporting the workplace culture and being more progressive?
I would definitely start with, I'm thinking this really resonates with me, Melissa, because when I got to Stanford a little bit over a year ago, specifically in CAPS, there was no diversity, equity, inclusion team. There was no diversity, equity, inclusion mission. There was no equity, inclusion seminar, or these affinity groups that we've been talking about, right? And so I think one of the things that our leader did that I respect so much is that she listened to the voices of her staff. And so there was a critical incident happening on that campus. I believe it was a noose that was hung from the tree for a summer that really impacted our medical students because it was close to that building. And she held a conversation to talk about people's impact. And, she asked people who felt like they were skilled enough to curate a conversation. So it started with really listening to people's voices. And I'm thinking about, I think it goes a long way. It's very hard from my perspective for change sometimes to come when leaders make decisions on behalf of an organization versus letting the people in the organization inform them on what changes need to be made. And so what she demonstrated was kind of like, okay, I'm open. I know that there's a problem. I'm seeing it. Can we hear from people's voices? And from that space, I just kind of collected people's voices, and they were like, ongoing training. And I submitted a proposal, and that proposal would require that we have some protected time. That proposal would require that it is mandated for people. That proposal would require that we commit to operationalizing this diversity, equity, inclusion. And we know that means it's going to come with some level of discomfort. And so I just see it in multiple different steps, but it always, to me, starts with listening to the voices of the people who are sharing their truths about what they would like to see different. And then, engaging professional expertise, consultants, people do this for a living, organizational structural change. They come in, they assess, they figure out what the policies, procedures are, strategies that continue to keep people marginalized, continue to censor some voices at the expense of others, and listen, and then to that ongoing change. But I think the worst thing you could do is do that on behalf of people. We saw, the not to bring in politics, but the people, the Democrats in Kente Cloth kneeling. Black folks didn't ask you to do that. We asked you to change policy. We asked you to listen to what we asked you to do and not do what you think we want you to do, and that is affirmative. And so I think to Melissa's question, for organizations and leaders, hold a space and listen to the voices of those people there and let that inform your change. And if you don't have the expertise, bring in a professional who has to help you do that work.
Yeah. I'd say pretty simply, when you look at organizations, resources is a huge sign, right? We're all getting emails now saying we value, Black lives and we value everything. It's like, that's great. What are the resources, right? Because I'll know if you're serious if you're giving money for staff time,
Mhm.
if you are paying for a consultant, if you are actually, doing something besides talk. So resources, what is it? Is there a way to build it into our mission or an activity? So I've known agencies that say, like at meetings, they add it as a line item that when we have a decision or something, we automatically check, how does this impact certain intersectional communities? Have we checked? Do we need to do something? So that's even just like an action thing that like, oh yeah, we're going to at least ask this now and create that space. So like, how do we build it into our policy or mission? Hopefully something experiential. Right? We have to get into the discomfort and the real. So actually do something. And it can, there have been things like field trips about actually going somewhere and learning somewhere, like being there. So yeah, not just like a training in a room, which does very little to change anybody's mind. And as a system, being able to apologize and grow, right? There are many things Stanford is still learning to do well. We have plenty of ideas about that. But for example, they really kind of botched the initial response to the news last summer by, frankly, under-responding and not understanding the potency of the symbolism and threat. But when they heard from students and staff and parents, they were able to come and say, we totally didn't get it. We really didn't. We heard. Okay, so for any system to kind of develop trust, there has to be the ability to say sometimes like, oh, yeah, that did not work. Or we totally missed this,
Yeah. I also hear that there is the investment of not just the short term, but making it part of the practice and it being long term. Like, no, not just a training for this 1 week or this 3 months, but ensuring that it's embedded long term in hiring policies and how you organize around your organization and the resources that you have. So I think that for me is part of it, like, especially if we're talking about building resiliency, it's not something that just happens once. It's not something that happens overnight, but it is over time that you're able to use those resources or able to develop those communities. And that trust point that you bring up is trust doesn't happen overnight either. It takes time. You have to put yourself in a vulnerable position to be able to allow that trust to develop. And I think large organizations can definitely learn from their employees and take what they're saying to heart and actually reflect that by making themselves vulnerable and creating space to develop that trust.
And ask for what you need, frankly, and ask for what you see as gaps. And again, this is a great space for allies. I remember hearing reports back that like the Psychotherapy Network has a huge training conference every year, but basically it's almost all white speakers, all the experts, and to have actually heard last year that one of the speakers, Esther Perel, really called that out from the stage.
I love her.
Like, we need to be able to point out like, hey, there's something missing here that would add value, and that we can't wait for the people who are in the like minority or the small positions to do that, right?
Yeah, I think this has been such an amazing conversation, dialogue about everything that's happening right now. And I know a lot of people are really hesitant to kind of have these dialogues. I am seeing a definite surge in groups wanting to talk about racism and wanting to talk about xenophobia, but not also addressing resilience in the face of it. And I think forgetting that aspect, it kind of ends up being a heated discussion. But this helps to really focus in on the clinicians, the work that we do, and how to support ourselves and grow at the same time. So I really appreciate both of you bringing in your perspectives and really kind of speaking to all of these major points, especially right now in our current climate.
Thank you all for having us. I think it's so necessary. I think it's responsive. Actually, I think it was curated with care and responsiveness. That I think that's a model of what people we need to see for this to be resilient and ongoing. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, really glad to have these conversations, which didn't exist when I was in graduate school at all. That's a whole other talk that I give, is like the networking skills that you're not actually taught, and the solidarity skills that I was taught. That all had to come later, but that has been actually the most helpful and resilience building and rewarding part of my professional career.
So I would say, just briefly, if both of you could do a quick, synopsis of what's at least one takeaway that you want people to grasp from this discussion. Just one thing you want them to really build.
I would say it's going to be daunting, but it could be taken away in pieces. The system in which America was built on, structural racism, capitalism, patriarchy is very much so alive and well. And it is doing, people say often the systems are broken. They're not. They're alive and well, and they're functioning exactly the way they were intended to. Marginalize, which is to oppress, which is to suppress, all in the name of capital and power, completely frank. And to really understand that would require that we all collectively have benefited in a lot of ways, and also some people have been further harmed. So that's our starting point. Like, that's point one. Point two, or start A. Well, to get to B, C, D, and E, we have to understand that this is a collective effort to be able to undo that. And with just one voice, or one set of people or one group of people, the people who are the most harmed, trying to work to undo that is, immoral, unfair, unjust, and cruel. And so we understand that, if one person is hurt, as fellow Americans, everybody is hurt. And so what is my role, as a cis Black female in, amplifying the voices of, non-binary trans Black people, because I have power and privilege in doing that. And then of my Asian American colleague who has more power and privilege to then amplify my voice in spaces to dismantle these systems that favor a group of people and marginalize another. I think that would be the truth. I think all of the conversations are irrelevant if we don't start there and begin, and then we have work in dismantling. Otherwise, we're just kind of shaking up the system a little bit, but it's still operating the way it was intended.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Helen, do you have a takeaway that you want people to, really hold on to?
That was perfect. And we've said so much. I guess one thing is, like, for anyone who's here, especially, or watching this later, like, you're already doing it. It's like knowing that this takes a little bit of an investment, but it is an investment in yourself, your community, your career, and to be proactive about that. And you do get a lot back. I've been on listservs and it's been like, anybody know how to help me with this indigenous practice of Filipino, or like, who knows a therapist here, or like, somebody help me with Tongan culture with my client, and I've gotten help. But you have to make these relationships and do that research beforehand, right? It's not like, oh, now my Black client's talking about Black Lives Matter and I'm going to demand somebody tell me everything right now. Like, no, do the investment, for your own sake, for your clients, your community, and so that you'll have this list and not feel panicked when you hit upon something that it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with this. It's like, okay, maybe someone on my list will be able to point me in the right direction.
Yeah, I think this discussion has been so rich, and one thing that I think I would encourage people to take away is to embrace the discomfort and to accept that this is a challenge, but this challenge is part of their growth. And I think, LaWanda, you spoke to, if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not growing. And Helen, forgive me if you said it. I think you both spoke to this point that growth comes from a bit of discomfort. And everyone has a learning edge, everyone has blind spots. And so the best way to move forward is to embrace it, continue to engage in these dialogues, seek out support with the community, seek out resources, and to educate. And I think that is really so important for not only our field to grow, but our society to grow as well. And I think both for being voices in that, because I think it's important to really take some time and not just think about racism as this binary thing that's been presented, but the importance of building yourself up, because we're constantly doing this work and we're going to be confronted with all sorts of things. So taking care of yourself, exploring the, the differences, being curious, and continuously learning.
Right.
Thank you again. And
thank you.
Hope to cross paths in a non-digital format at some point.
Exactly.
But I just want to thank you for joining us and really being a part of this discussion. It's been super rich, and I do hope that everyone who's tuned in has really enjoyed the conversation as much as I think we all have.
Super.
Thank y'all for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
And so just as a reminder for all of you who are still joining us, just please, one, if you can, say thank you to the speakers, because we really appreciated them coming and sharing their thoughts, their insight and knowledge with us, and really facilitating such a rich discussion. If you are going to hang around a while, please definitely check out our resources and download them, make use of them. And also, you can check YouTube for the video, which will be available. Also, if you want to stick around, and definitely I encourage this, use the meditation. That will be really helpful to kind of help bring you back to center. And also, if you are interested in the Pilates or yoga through PAD, please make use of that as well. And as always, thank you TogetherWell and Dr. Haley for putting this together. We really appreciate you, especially at this time, for bringing such a rich conversation together with Dr. Helen Hsu and Dr. LaWanda Hill. Thank you again, and good night.